Well, good evening and a very warm welcome to this evening's presentation from all of us here at Miriam. Welcome to you wherever you might be in the UK and indeed wherever you are in the world. And I'm delighted to welcome a number of international viewers to our programme this evening. Our series of online talks and conversations continues with our guest Tamar Hodes, and I'll introduce Tamar to you in just a moment. Some housekeeping first. Please do ask questions. The way to do this is to type whatever you'd like to ask into the Q&A facility on your screen, and we'll do our best to get through as many of your questions as we can. Let me also bring your attention to the chat facility. This will allow you to send a message to all of the other participants on this webinar, should you wish to do so. And finally, we are recording this programme and it will appear on our website at miriam.org.uk in the next couple of days. There you will find recordings of other past events as well as details of our future programme for which you can book tickets. And so to our guest this evening. Tamar was born in Israel to South African parents. Part of her childhood was spent on the Greek island Hydra, her parents being part of the artistic community there, which included the singer and songwriter Leonard Cohen, the subject of her second novel, The Water and the Wine. Coming to the UK aged 5, Tamar grew up in North London and studied English and education at Homer College, Cambridge, going on to teach English for 35 years before retiring. This evening we're going to hear about this book, Tamar's third novel, called Mixed, which was published just over 6 months ago. So Tamar, a very warm welcome. I'm sure you'll tell us all about yourself and the book, and then hopefully people will have some questions for you. So over to you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and good evening, everybody. So lovely to have you all with me. Yes, as Jonathan said, slightly a nomadic childhood, so I'll just elaborate a bit on who I am and where I've been, because that will feed directly into the novel that we're going to discuss this evening, which is called Mixed. So, as Jonathan said, my parents were from South Africa. My father was from Cape Town, my mother from Oudtshoorn, which some of you probably have visited on the garden route. And in the early 1950s, when Israel was newly founded, they each answered a call to go and work on a kibbutz called Timorim. And they didn't know each other at that stage, but they each answered the call to go. And they arrived there and they met each other. My father was working with a sheep, my mother was picking oranges, and they got married on the kibbutz. For various reasons, they decided to leave the kibbutz. The two main reasons they gave were, in those days, the children lived communally in dormitories and slept there at night, and my parents didn't seem to like that idea. Secondly, there was a dispute on the kibbutz council committee. They had very little money in those days. It was a very rough terrain, and there was enough money to either pay for my father, who wrote non-fiction books, to have a typewriter ribbon so he could carry on with his writing, or there was enough money for a tractor part, and you can imagine which one. And my father was very disappointed, and for that reason they left the kibbutz. They then moved to Herzliya Patuach. I'm sure many of you have been there or know it. And my father was working at the American Embassy. He was very good at translating English to Hebrew and back again. And as I said, writing non-fiction books, for example, about the Middle East, about Martin Buber, the philosopher whom he knew very well. And then my parents heard about an island called Hydra in Greece, about 2 hours from Athens on the ferry. And on this island, there was an artistic community. Interesting that they went from one community to another. I find that quite fascinating. Anyway, they decided to go to this community. And there, I think, were probably about 60 or 70 houses. It's hard to tell. And there were some people there who were writers, artists, poets, sculptors, and they were all doing their work, living in their own homes, most of which were rented, but Leonard Cohen actually bought his house. And if any of you go to Hydra, you can actually see the house, which is still there and used by his family. And my parents became part of that community, the artistic community. My mother was a painter, my father was writing, and that led to my second novel, which Jonathan mentioned, earlier, which is called The Water and the Wine. And when I was 4, we went to live in South Africa for a year with my grandmother in Oudtshoorn. When I was 5, we moved to North London. So by the time I was 5, I'd lived in 3 countries. So a little bit confusing, England being my 4th country. And I grew up in North London. When I was older, I went to Henrietta Barnett School, which I'm sure many of you know. Very happy there. And at the school in those days, no longer, but in those days, 40% of the girls were Jewish. I came from a Reform background, but there were some Orthodox girls there as well. So all the time I was meeting a lot of different ways of being Jewish, and all of that in a way is fed into the book. When I was 18, I went to Homerton College, Cambridge, as Jonathan said, to train to be an English teacher. And there I encountered more issues about not anti-Semitic issues, luckily, but curiosity about being Jewish. Most people there weren't. And because I'd come from a very specific background, which is a South African Jewish background, I sort of thought most people were like that. And then I went to Cambridge and most people weren't like that. In fact, they were going to church on a Sunday morning, which was a huge shock to me. Then my husband and I got married and we moved to Kiel in the Midlands because he was a music professor at the university there. And then 20 years ago, we moved to Southampton University. So all through this time, I've been meeting, obviously, many non-Jewish people as well. I should say that I was a school teacher for 35 years, so meeting more people. And all of the experiences of seeing how different Jewish people either celebrate their Judaism or dissociate themselves from their Judaism led me to this novel called Mixed. And it's often said that writers write the novel that they want to read. Writers write the novel that they want to read, in the same way that inventors might invent something that they would like to use. And I felt that there was no novel around. Obviously, there are great Jewish writers in this country, many of them older now. There wasn't a novel really about being Jewish now in contemporary UK. I wrote it 3 years ago, so it is not about the awful goings on in the Middle East. It's not a political novel. It's much more focused than that. And it's focused really on 2 sisters. I don't have a sister, and therefore I felt it was safe terrain to have these 2 sisters at the heart of the novel. And the 2 sisters are Ruth Green and Miriam Green. And they take very different views of being Jewish. They each value their Jewish identity, but in very different ways. So Ruth is married to Simon, they run a business together, and they live in North London, and they have 3 children, all in Jewish schools, and they're very involved with the synagogue and with Jewish life. In fact, they don't really know many non-Jewish people. Those are the choices they've made. And I invented this fictional area called Goldwell Hill. I'm sure you can work out where I got the name from. And they have a very strong sense of being Jewish in quite a traditional way and feel very strongly that they want to pass that on to their children and their children's children. And that is their view. And I did try very hard in the novel not to be judging people's opinions. I hope that I haven't. I hope I've been exploring and representing rather than judging, because I understand all these points of view in the novel, because as I said, I've met all these people in my life. Miriam, the sister, could not be more different, really. She wants to have a Jewish life, but she wants to do it living in the Midlands with a non-Jewish husband, Chris, and 2 children in the local state school, where they are the only Jewish children. And her best friend actually is Muslim. And she wants to live a life where she is celebrating her Judaism, but within a context of a multicultural environment. She's also 5 hours from North London, where her sister lives, and most importantly, Harold and Evelyn, the long-suffering parents of these bickering sisters. And the bickering really is about their attitudes to being Jewish. They don't really agree with the other's way of being Jewish. And I think this happens a lot in families, in my experience. The people either marry a non-Jew or they want to be more frum than someone else. And these are the consequences that can arise when there are differences of opinion. So Ruth and Miriam have a very difficult relationship. And something in the novel happens that I won't tell you about now, which really threatens the whole family unit and certainly the sisters' bond, because they have such different views on being Jewish. Around them are family, cousins, parents, grandparents, who also have their own view. So, for example, they have an uncle called Gerald, their mother's brother. There is a family tree in the book, so don't worry if it sounds a bit complicated. And Gerald wants nothing to do with any religion, including Judaism. He won't attend simchas, he won't go to anything. He doesn't believe any of it is what he wants to do, which causes another kind of friction. And I do say in the novel at one stage, if Judaism were a swimming pool, Ruth would be in the middle of it. Miriam would be at the edge, dangling her feet in the water, and Gerald wouldn't even be in the building. And so I tell this narrative and this story in three different ways. In fact, the structure of the novel really came from looking at a challah one Shabbat evening and seeing how all the way it's plaited and thinking that's actually a good structure for a novel, because not only is it about mixed attitudes towards being Jewish, the novel itself is mixed in its structure, and there are three strands to it. One is the story, the narrative, which goes chronologically through the novel. The other one is some pretty zany takes on Jewish recipes. So, for example, chopped herring, take some herring, chop it, fumigate the house. And also monologues by these various characters where they have the chance to say, Ruth and Miriam and their husbands and everyone else, this is who I am, this is what I believe. And I've tried, I have to say the novel is not about the Orthodox, about whom I don't know a huge amount, and I haven't lived that life, so I didn't feel it was for me to try and represent it. But it's more sort of middle ground Judaism, and to show the different views that people have. Also, although it has a serious issue about intermarriage, identity, belonging, and family friction, I also wanted it to be enjoyable, because I feel that a lot of novels about being Jewish are very gloomy, quite understandably. There's a lot to be gloomy about. But we all know that Judaism also contains enormous joy, and it has music, and it has food, and it has jokes. And I wanted to convey that as well. So I was very pleased when a few months ago the novel was longlisted for the Comedy Women in Print Award, which made me feel that it must be a little bit funny, hopefully. And to give an idea of that, I'm going to read you an extract. So this extract in the novel is about the evening when Miriam, remember she's the one who lives in the Midlands with a non-Jewish husband, Chris. She tells her mother about the fact that she has met Chris. And this is the conversation on the phone. So he's on the same course as you, said her mother, Evelyn, when Miriam rang to tell her that she was going out with someone. Yes, we're both studying English. Miriam thought it will be the third or fourth question. Her mum would want to make it seem as if she wasn't curious as to whether he was Jewish or not, but of course that was the one thing she was bursting to know. In your year? Yes, same as me. And he's from London also? No, from the Midlands. Lovely. What's his name? She hoped for Nathan Feigelmeier or Moses Mazinski. Chris Steele. And there she had her answer in 2 words, not Jewish. Miriam knew that her mother minded, but pretended not to mind. No, he isn't Jewish, she said unnecessarily, because Miriam wanted to say it herself and try not to conceal it. But he's lovely. She was angry with herself for adding that, and anyway, it didn't matter how nice he was. He could have built an orphanage in India and saved a species of dormouse from extinction. It still wouldn't make him Jewish. That's great, sweetheart. Bring him to meet us, eh? Evelyn sounded disappointed, but she didn't want to be disappointed. She wanted to be liberal, tolerant, broad-minded, but she knew that she wasn't really any of those things. She reminded herself that one daughter had married in, so would it matter if the other married out? She had a 50% success rate, so that was quite good, wasn't it? Would that mitigate the disapproval from the family? She could just imagine her sister-in-law Ida's face. Her mother Gretel wouldn't be happy either. Thank goodness Harold's Bubba Schlossie was no longer alive, Baruch Hashem. Miriam's dating someone, and he's not Jewish, she told Harold at dinner that night. He froze, a forkful of beef near his mouth. Who? Miriam, your younger daughter. Harold had one ambition, to find peace, but he'd never managed it. Living in a house with 3 women had been an utter nightmare. At any given time, someone had a period, or was expecting a period, or was recovering from a period. The only thing worse than having a period, and the moodiness and bad skin that accompanied it, was not having one. As his daughters started going out with boys, and Miriam was especially productive in this area, a late period could only mean one thing as far as they were concerned, though to him it was just another example of Jewish time. As they were consistently late for everything else, synagogue, Shabbat meals, school, why should their periods be any different? Harold was fed up with the bathroom being filled with feminine items, tampons, tissues, earbuds, and balls of cotton wool, like little clouds, all designed to plug orifices and absorb liquids. How he had longed for a son, a nice, uncomplicated, non-menstruating male with whom he could kick a ball and share a beer. Someone who would recover quickly if things went wrong and wouldn't remember it or allude to it for the next 10 years. But no, he had daughters, and even though they've left home, they still drove him a sugar. There was always something going on, a crisis, a problem that he had to know about and hopefully solve. Someone else's mess to clear up. Someone's hairdryer or heart was broken, or they needed money. Do I look like a cash point machine? Or they wanted comforting. He dreamed about being on a desert island, palm trees, the water lapping upon a golden shore, silver fish arching from the sparkling sea. So what do you think, Harry? Evelyn was there, honoured him as usual. About what? He put his salt beef reluctantly back on his plate. Oh, you're so irritating. About Miriam having a non-Jewish boyfriend, that's what. What does it matter? As my father used to say, we're on the earth and then we die. As long as she's happy. Right. So even if the boy's an axe murderer, as long as they're happy, that's fine. Axe murderer? Who said such a thing? Your imagination. Golden sands, lapping water. And so Miriam brought Chris to dinner. Chris looked from one guest to another and tried to remember everyone's names. Ruth and Simon were there, Harold and Evelyn, and of course they had to have Morris, bachelor brother of Evelyn, who survived any awkward social event by telling Jewish jokes, which he led him into by starting so and avoiding eye contact. And Harold's widowed sister Ida, whose philosophy was, I've had a dreadful life, so why shouldn't you? Luckily, Evelyn's parents, Yitzchak and Gretel, rarely went out in the evenings these days, so there were fewer people to try to appease. Miriam pushed Chris into the dining room of her parents' house, like a mother firmly coaxing a reluctant child down a slide. This is Chris, she announced. Chris, who looked thinner and paler than normal, as if he'd suddenly lost weight, courage and all self-confidence, nodded politely. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for having me. And he held out some flowers for Evelyn. These are for you, Mrs. Green. And she took them from him. So sweet. Please call me Evelyn. Do sit down. This is Harold, my husband. Long-suffering, clarified Harold. Pleased to meet you. And his sister Ida. Ida put her head on one side and shrugged. And Miriam's sister Ruth and her husband Simon. Did she say that with special affection, or did Miriam imagine it? And this is Morris, my brother. Chris sat down and looked nervous, as if he were going to be tested on their names later. Good evening, everyone. The atmosphere was tense. So, said Morris, Moishe says to his friend Jaime, what do you think? I came home to find my wife in bed with my best friend. That's terrible, said Jaime. What did you do? I made myself a cup of tea. You made yourself a cup of tea, said Jaime. What about the man in bed with your wife? Ah, says Moishe, he can make his own tea. Miriam and Ruth laughed. They adored Uncle Morris, but no one else did. They'd heard the joke too many times before. Shush, Morris, said Evelyn. We're going to light the candles now. And she passed a spare yarmulke to Chris. Miriam had explained to him about the blessings over the candles, wine and challah, so he was prepared, but he listened intently to the Hebrew, as if they were speaking in code. The little hat sat uncomfortably on his curly hair like a boat on choppy waters, unable to settle. Evelyn started to serve the meal, undercooked roast chicken as usual for Shabbat, and everyone tucked in, managing to eat and speak at the same time. Chris was impressed. In his family, you did one or the other. Not only were these people able to converse, they did it across the table to the people on either side of them, all at the same time, so that verbal arrows were shooting in every direction. Chicken's nice, Mum. Did you add lemon this time? Yes, I thought we'd had enough of garlic. Pass the potatoes round. So, Chris, you study English like Miriam. You'll never guess who I saw. Only Jerry Rutofsky. 6 feet tall now and married. Jerry Rutofsky, you're kidding me. That's a name I haven't heard for a while. What? Can't be. You got the contract. Mazel tov. Yes, he's married, 2 kids. So you like books like Miriam? Kids, Jerry, pass the veg. Poor Chris, his eyes darting around the room, wondered when he was expected to respond and which question he should prioritise, waiting politely for a pause to arise. It never did. But the atmosphere was convivial, everyone friendly, apart from Ida, who shot him a few death stares over the carrots. Evelyn had one fear in life, that someone may not have eaten enough. She'd made 3 puddings, lokshen, fruit salad, and a dairy-free sponge pudding. Ruth and Simon didn't mix milk and meat. She darted backwards and forwards to the kitchen, clearing plates, bringing more food, making sure that no one went hungry. Guests didn't leave her home after a meal. They staggered out, bloated, and heavier than when they'd arrived, undoing their zips and buttons, gasping for air. The broccoli's nice, Ida muttered snidely to Evelyn. I like it raw. Did you hear what she said to me? Evelyn asked Harold later, when they were in bed. Harold muttered, just dropping off. Who? Your sister Ida. She said that my broccoli was raw. I know how to cook vegetables, thank you very much. How dare she say it was raw? Leave it, said Harold, putting a conciliatory hand on his wife's arm. Let it go, will you? Anyway, what did you think of Chris? Who's Chris? Your daughter's new boyfriend. He's tall, nice manners, very quiet. He's got 2 eyes, a mouth, a nose, and he breathes. What else is there to say? Said Harold, trying to sleep again. Palm trees, white sand. She could have found a Jewish boy tall as a lamppost who had nice manners also. Nothing against him, just makes life easier. Nothing makes life easier, said Harold, trying to drift off again. It's a headache from the moment you're born till the moment you die. Solace and nothing besides. Good night. Miriam's experience at Chris's parents' home couldn't have been more different. His mother wore a floral apron over a plain dress and blushed coyly when she spoke, as if she was embarrassed by herself. Chris's dad was in a 3-piece suit and had shaved especially for the occasion, leaving his skin pink and shiny. Good of him to wear a suit for our first meeting, Miriam said to Chris later. No, he wears a suit every day. He has one for gardening, one to put the bins out, another for handiwork. Maureen was petite and looked uneasy about taking up any room at all. Ian was taller, but also managed to look as though he felt bad that he was occupying space which could have been used by others. Miriam thought, they are the opposite of people who are comfortable in their own skin. Whereas dinner at the Greens' house had been noisy and lively, this one was near silent, the clock on the mantelpiece ticking like a metronome as they ate. Maureen served them roast lunch. Chris had warned her against pork, so she made beef with huge Yorkshire puddings, boats drowning in a gravy sea. And there were only occasional comments. The meats turned out nice, or anybody want more potatoes? Pudding was trifle, which Miriam ate out of courtesy, though she was quite full. The blancmange and whipped cream sank to the pit of her stomach. After lunch, they played Chinese checkers and dominoes, and Ian showed Miriam his raspberry canes. Miriam found Chris's parents warm and modest, although some of their traditions were very alien to her. For example, net curtains in Ian's shed. the 2-bar electric heater turned on, although it was sunny. The way Maureen wheeled the trolley in with already filled plates on it. In Miriam's family, you put bowls of food on the table and everyone helped themselves. It was as if she was a middle-aged air hostess. She even kept her apron on while she was eating. Your parents are so sweet, Miriam said when they'd left and were taking the train back to university. Do you think so? They liked you, I could tell. I hope so. They did. They're quiet, gentle people, a bit bemused by their academic son. I noticed they only had a few books. Yes, the Bible, the complete works of Shakespeare, which I won as a prize, and a nature guide to birds and butterflies. How did they cope when you were at grammar school and clearly academic? A bit bemused, I suppose, but also proud. I'm relieved today went well. Now we've met both sets of parents. Well, one thing's for sure, said Miriam, snuggling up to him. Neither of us is going to go hungry at either house. And I mentioned the recipes that I put in, which are meant to be hopefully amusing. And I thought I'd just give you an example and see if anyone's got any questions they want to ask. This recipe is called Delicious Knishes. Use any pastry you like, strudel dough, unsweetened biscuit dough, or a flaky dough. Cut into circles. Fill with potato, chicken, or cheese. Fold and bake. When they're cool, enjoy your delicious knishes and make your wishes. Wipe your mouth and give your partner kisses. So I'll pause there and see if anybody has anything they would like to ask.
Well, thank you, Tamar. That's a really fascinating introduction to you and to the book. You've told us a lot, but there's a huge amount you've left out, and obviously people need to read the novel themselves to understand more. If you have questions, please do type them into the Q&A now. You've explained how your background and your experiences informed the book, but was there a sort of moment of inspiration? Was there something specific that made you think, yes, this is the book I want to write? Or did it sort of, yes, there was.
There was actually, Jonathan. I now live in Hampshire, but when we lived in Manchester, I was a member of Menorah Synagogue, and I went to a talk one morning, and the title was Mixed Marriages, and I thought that the talk would be about marriages between different faiths. But the woman actually started by saying that her husband was Jewish and she was Jewish, and she said all marriages, in my opinion, are mixed, which actually is where the title came from 20 years ago. And what she meant by that was that even if you are Jewish and you marry another Jewish person, there's still going to probably be issues about, do you want your child to go to a Jewish school or not? And do you want them to have a certain kind of bar mitzvah or not? Or, how observant do you want to be? How do you feel about Shabbat evenings? So what she was saying, that even, let alone a Jewish to a non-Jewish marriage, which brings its own issues, but a Jewish marriage to another one is still mixed. Which I thought was very interesting. And then people all shared their ideas. I wanted the novel to be relatable to people, and I hope it is. I don't know. I've done a few readings so far, and one, a Jewish lady said to me, "How did you know my family?" And I said, "I've never met you before." She said, "But you've just written about my parents and my sister." So I was terribly chuffed about that she felt it was relatable. And I don't know whether people can relate to it or not, but I hope they can. It's certainly partly my family and people I know. I think a lot of Jewish families do have this sort of mixture of people with different views on the kind of Jewish life. That I haven't met many families. Maybe it's more common in the Orthodox, but in our sort of world, I haven't met many families who totally agree with everybody about everything.
I suppose a lot of the humour is in the caricature nature of some of the characters, and that must chime with people, because we all know people like the people you've written about.
I hope so. I hope so. And Morris, who's this character who tells jokes, he's got something that he's hiding, and he hides that within the jokes, and he avoids awkward situations by saying, "So, do you know the one about, and off he goes. He needs no introduction. He just, volunteers.
Where did you find all the jokes from? Were they jokes you'd heard, or were they found through research? Because there's a lot of jokes in the book.
I'm going to be honest, Jonathan, they all came from memory. And I do say at the back of the novel, you're meant to say, I read this book, I did research, and I did actually say at the back of the book, no research was undertaken in the writing of this book, which is absolutely true, because I know the food that I'm talking about, and I do know all the jokes. In fact, when I was a school teacher for many years, sometimes on a rainy Monday morning going to school, feeling a bit less enthusiastic than I should have done, I could tell the Jewish jokes to myself because I know them all. I know hundreds and hundreds of jokes. I'm sure we all do. And I always wondered what the other passengers in the cars thought when they saw me guffawing in the car. But I had a way of, unless Rabbi Lionel Blue was on thought for the day, that was wonderful. He cheered me up. But if he wasn't, I carried my own jokes around with me. And I still do. I absolutely love Jewish humour. And I find it slightly ridiculous and very amusing. And at the back of the book, there are lots of spares that Morris didn't have a chance to put in the novel, so he wants to share them with everybody at the back.
So the two sisters are very different,
Yeah,
and that obviously is the source of the big tension
yes.
in the book. Was one of them easier for you to write than the other? Is one of them more you than the other? And
Yes.
let me just caveat this with a question David Port, one of our viewers, has asked. He said, "Is the novel all lifted from life? Is the
Mm.
culture clash resolvable? Which sister is happier with her choice of lifestyle?"
Gosh,
So that's
brilliant
a
questions there,
lot of
David. Thank you
questions.
very much. And people always assume I'm Miriam because although I grew up in North London, I've, as an adult, lived in mostly, areas with not many Jews, although I've always found a synagogue to join and a small Jewish community wherever you are. So people assume I'm more Miriam, but of course, no writer is completely one character. There have been times in my life I think it might have been easier to be in Ruth. There are occasionally, not often, times in my life where I think maybe Gerald's got the answer, just take himself out of it. But I wouldn't want that because I love being part of a Jewish community. So I think I've known all those people. That's what I was saying. So I have a great advantage in that I do know what Ruth's rationale is. And I do understand. Um, I think Ruth probably has a better, an easier time than Miriam. Miriam at one stage goes to see the rabbi and talk to him in confidence. And she says, my life is not easy. Everything is a decision. Should the children come off school for Rosh Hashanah? And should we insist on them not going out on a Friday night? And everything is a big decision for her. Whereas for Ruth, I think being surrounded by Jewish people, children in Jewish schools, very involved in the synagogue, it's easier as far as the children are concerned, I think, because they don't need to struggle. All their friends are doing the same that they are. So it isn't sort of why are we lighting, candles of Hanukkah? Because they're all doing it.
Mm.
However, they have their issues as well. I didn't want to be naive and think that they have no issues. In fact, they have their one son. They've got two daughters and a son, and the son David has some learning difficulties. They've had miscarriages. There've been problems with their business. So it isn't a total protection from life, um, but I think their community does help them. So I think probably they have the best deal.
But if you're drawing on personal experience in creating these characters, is there a problem handling the boundary between what's real and what isn't? And do people sort of come up to you and say, "You've written about me," or
I've had that quite a
yeah,
lot, yes, and I was quite pleased that because I'm basically a reform. I was very pleased that one of my not orthodox but more orthodox friends, Mazorti, said to me that she really liked Ruth and she felt that Ruth was well represented, and that was terribly important to me. I did not want to be judging people because I genuinely do understand the reason that they all behave the way they do. The one I relate to least is Gerald because I just couldn't cut myself off from family and a community. I find that very isolating. But I
mm,
sort of understand with all this friction going on and arguing and tension, he just removes himself. But I feel his children miss out because they don't go to any family events. I mean, right, fiction is always a kind of version of life, I think. It's never is life because in real life, you know, you'd go to the loo and you'd have a shower and you'd make yourself some toast. And those aren't very exciting things to read about. So you are selecting parts that you think might resonate with other people. I wouldn't say the fiction is life. I'd say it's a version of life. It has a relationship to life.
Okay. Um, let's talk about these monologues. I think I counted 13 of them. So they're written in the first person. They're written um, by the characters, I
That's
suppose,
right.
from the point of view of
Yeah.
the book. How challenging was it for you to get inside the heads of these characters and write convincingly from that standpoint? Because it's one thing, I suppose, creating a scenario that a character moves around in, but you've got to get a huge amount of detail about a character to be able to write from their perspective. And of course, they are telling all, aren't they? They're almost in the psychiatrist's couch when they're reciting these monologues. Did you find that
Exactly.
challenging?
I didn't actually
Mm.
because again I know the people I'm writing about. You know, if you ask me to write a novel about space or you know astrophysics, I'm going to struggle. But these are the people I have known, and so I was able to think. You know that girl I know in North London. What would she say? What is her feeling? And I liked the idea of the monologues because I felt that it wasn't me writing about their life, which in a way seemed a bit presumptuous, something as important as one's faith. And so they get a chance to tell the story themselves without me. And as obviously I've written it, but it doesn't feel as if the author is there. I wanted to give them a chance, whether I agree with every single thing they said or not. Um, I run a creative writing group every Wednesday morning. I've got 8 students writing novels, which is absolutely fascinating. Some writing vampire stories, some historical fiction, whole range. It's just fascinating. And one thing we've talked a lot about is bias, because when you write a character, for example, in Jekyll and Hyde, Robert Louis Stevenson makes it very, very obvious who you're meant to like. You're meant to like Dr. Jekyll, who's responsible and decent and respectable. You're not meant to like Hyde. And therefore, he describes him as, you know, dark and deformed and frightening. The bias is very, very clear. And someone like Dickens as well writes very, very clearly you are not to like this person, you are to like that one. I think modern
Mm.
fiction's a bit more subtle than that. Um, and writers often say, well, I want the reader to make their own mind up. They don't really make their own mind up because you only give them enough information to have certain views. But you and I will know we read the same novel, we go to the cinema, and you might say, you know, I really like the character of the man, the father. And I'd say, no, I didn't think he was nice at all. You know, look at the way he behaved. So I really like the idea of the characters. I've never done that before, but I really enjoyed the characters speaking for themselves as if unfiltered by me. And then I was very
Yeah.
nervous about being biased against anybody.
Now, if I'm not mistaken, this is the first time you've used humour and comedy in a novel, and
That's
you
right.
mentioned that you were shortlisted for the Comedy Women in Print
Yes.
Award. So congratulations, longlisted.
Thank you.
Congratulations on that. It's a great achievement.
Thank you.
Um, how does humour help to tell this story? Because it is quite a serious story at
Yes.
the end of the day. How do you feel humour makes it better?
Well, partly I wanted to, as I said earlier, I find a lot of novels about being Jewish quite understandably very dark and very gloomy.
Mm.
And we all know we don't need any help in understanding why that is. But I also feel that Judaism is joyful and happy and funny and wonderfully warm and full of camaraderie. Thinking back to the Seder's of my childhood, I tingled with excitement, you know, when I was going to our friend's house because I just knew it was going to be wine and candles and lovely food and soup and a lovely atmosphere. And I really wanted to convey the joy of Judaism, not to trivialize what, as you say, is a serious story. It was rather amusing to me that the 2 more serious novels I've written have sold quite well, but they haven't won any awards. And then I write a funny one, and then it seems to have done better than the others. So it seems to have gone down well. I also wanted humour to have several roles in the novel, so it's a binding. Um, factor. It brings the family together. It's also a disguise for Morris because he's hiding himself behind the jokes because it avoids speaking openly about some issues that he's got. He doesn't want to speak. So if someone says, "How are you, Morris?" "Oh, have you heard the one about?" It's a disguise. It's a shield for him.
It's a mask.
Um,
Yeah.
but it's also part of being Jewish. For me, the humour, Woody Allen, Neil Simon, I grew up with that, Jackie Mason. I love Jewish humour, and I just love the sort of slightly ridiculous aspect of it, the way that it often goes off at a tangent and
Mm.
focuses on the thing that you're not really meant to be discussing, like, the wife who says, "It was terrible last night. My husband went down to the bottom of the garden to pick carrots for our meal," she tells her friend, "and he had a heart attack, sadly, and died." And the friend said, "That's terrible. What did you do?" So we had to have peas instead. It always goes off at the wrong tangent, doesn't it?
Mm.
I love Jewish humour, and the slightly ridiculous, self-denigrating aspect as well. The husbands and wives, the joking.
Mm.
It's absolutely part of what being Jewish. I suppose I wanted the novel to feel Jewish, is what I
Mm.
really
No,
wanted.
it
Yeah.
certainly is. I mean, viewers might be aware Woody Allen has just published his first novel at the age of
Can't
91.
wait.
So
Can't wait to read it.
it's worth a go. It's not a particularly long novel. It's very well written. Um,
Yes.
at the end of a lot of the chapters, as you said, you have a recipe, and there's a lot of humor in these
Yeah.
recipes. What inspired that? It's quite unusual.
I've never done that before. Again, um, lots of reasons. I mean, the one is, again, to emphasize that Judaism is not just a gloomy experience for those of us. I was thinking of Jewish readers, but also non-Jewish readers, and I've been quite touched that there is a glossary at the back. And some of my non-Jewish friends and colleagues have read it, and I said, "Did you understand it?" "Yes, it was fine. We had a glossary at the back. We had to look things up, and why not? I read novels set in India and Japan, and I'm not against them. I'm willing to read anything that's interesting." But also because it is one of the aspects of our lives that if you wrote a really gloomy novel without music and joy and candles and food, you would be, in a sense, doing a disservice to what Judaism is. And I wanted to present it as, of course, a faith with a lot of issues, but also for me, particularly as a child, very, very joyful. Um, and I just really wanted to convey that. But it's again to do with the fact that, the message is the medium in a sense, isn't it? If you're going to write a novel about mixed characters, I wanted the structure of the novel to be mixed.
Mm.
So therefore, having a story, having funny recipes, and having jokes and having the monologues made the whole experience feel like a bit of a jumble.
Mm.
Um, and I really wanted to give that feeling of Judaism is not just one thing. People who are non-Jewish might think it is one thing. And of course, it's not. It's many things. And I suppose the novel, in a way, is asking for a kind of tolerance, which the sisters don't display to each other. And whether the rift is healed, you'll have to wait and see. But they are not tolerant towards each other. They're very intolerant. Miriam feels that Ruth is sort of hogging Judaism to herself in a
Mm.
sense and excluding her. And Ruth thinks that Miriam is treating it like a pick and mix, that she's just doing the bits she wants to do, that she's not taking it seriously. So
Mm.
the novel is a whole mixture of things. So the recipes were just another thing to add in.
The sisters seem to have a convivial relationship until something challenges them,
It does.
and then it collapses.
It does.
Yeah.
And
Um,
and really tests them and has a terrible effect on Harold and Evelyn, who I really wanted to include because I feel through my life, and I'm sure other people's lives, we've known that kind of couple
mm.
who play a kind of a game. She says, "You remember so and so who?" And they tease each other. They're very happy together. She's tiny, he's huge, she's a terrible cook. Um, and they have at Seder, they bring another table in from the garden. We know that kind of scenario, don't we? Bring in the garden chairs, put on a white tablecloth. Everyone's wondering whether they'll be the ones with the table leg in between their knees, and none of the crockery really matches and the food's not great. But there's always room for they're hospitable, magnanimous. And I've met so many Jewish people like that in my life. I remember moving to a new area once and going to a synagogue for a Shabbat meal with my husband and children. We didn't really know anyone. And a woman who had never met me came up and said, if you've got a long journey home, would you like to stay the night? And I thought
Wow.
it was just
Yeah.
extraordinary. It could have been, criminals or something. I suppose she felt we weren't. And we didn't stay the night, but I just never forgot it. I thought to say that because it was rainy and it was dark. And she said, come and stay with me. I've got a spare room. That magnanimity, which I think you do get. And I just wanted the book to feel the way it is to be Jewish. I wanted the food and the wine and the humour and the
Mm.
friction and the tension and all of it in there so that people can either hopefully relate to it or they can, as a non-Jewish person, say, oh, this is what it's like to be Jewish. I didn't realise.
So we've got a comment and a question from Pessy Kraus, who is watching in Jerusalem, and she says it's
Oh,
wonderful relief from the tensions we're all living with over there.
I'm so pleased.
She suggests your next career should be as a stand-up comedian. Um, but her question is, did you ever consider that Chris might have converted? Was that ever something in your mind for the plot, and what might have happened if he had done?
Yes, I did think about it. I didn't think he would because at another stage I explained that his parents, who were quite Christian, he stopped going to church when he was 13 and said, I'm never going again. So it wasn't that Miriam took him away from a religion that he didn't really have, and he's not a great fan of religion. So I just didn't think it was, I did think about it. I didn't feel it was plausible that he would. And obviously, we've
Mm.
all known many people who have done very successfully, but I didn't think that he would undertake that.
Was there anything else you thought you might include in the book which you cut out or changed
I think the
course with?
difficulty was knowing how dark to take it, uh,
Right.
and I think it gets quite dark. But I decided, you have to decide where you're going to go when you write. You can do
Mm.
all sorts of things. I mean, you are just words on a piece of paper. That's all you are, and you have to make decisions. And sometimes I've written things which maybe I feel have gone a bit far. We all have our own sort of feeling of how far to
Mm.
take it, but it's serious at one stage. It's very serious, but I didn't want it to be, so gloomy. I just think there's enough gloomy literature about
Mm.
being Jewish around, and I don't really need to add to it. I mean, I did a reading a few days ago, and the one woman on the watching said, "Why didn't I include the politics of now and the horrible rise in anti-Semitism?" And I just said, it's not that I'm very aware of those things, and I read a lot about them and experience them, but I didn't feel that was the parameters that this novel existed in. And you do have to kind of put a bit of a fence around a novel. And, a novel of 250 pages can't take on the whole of Jewish history,
No, of course.
all the issues. And the novel was not meant to be that. It was very specifically homing in on how do we cope in families when people take different paths. And I wish that the two sisters had been more tolerant of each other, but they're not. They're not tolerant.
But you could have made them more tolerant.
I
That's
could
your
have,
prerogative as the
well, you
writer.
can you can do
Mm.
all sorts of things,
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
you? Yes,
Um,
someone I was teaching the other day said, "How do I know where to go now?" And of
well,
course, there's no
it's a
there's
good
no
question.
textbook, I'm afraid. You have
So,
to
so,
make
so
your own
you,
decision.
you said you had the title about 20 years ago. How
I
long,
did.
how long did it take you to actually write the book?
And I find that actually a lot of writing is thinking. So
Mm.
I think a lot about writing. I mean, I have written some other, I've written a lot of short stories as well, but it was sort of, in a way, incubating for many,
Mm.
many years. And I went to London once to hear Ronald Harwood, who wrote The Dresser. He was
Mm.
speaking, and he was 64 at the time. And somebody in the audience said, "How long did it take you to write The Dresser?" And he said 64 years, which I thought was a
Mm.
wonderful answer. So what he was saying was, you don't start a novel on a Tuesday. You don't sit down and say, what should I write about? Oh, I know, Judaism. It doesn't work like that. It's the incubation or the gestation takes so many years. Sometimes the novel almost seems to write itself. And I would say parts of
Mm.
this seemed to me to write themselves. Other parts were a lot harder, but they're already there.
Well, that was my next question,
Mm.
and we obviously have a lot of writers on Millim, some of whom meticulously plan the structure of their work before they write, and some who seem to just sit down and write, and the book emerges. Which school are you in?
I'm more of the latter,
Yeah,
but having thought an enormous
right.
amount.
You plan it in
Uh,
your head, and
in
and
my
then you
head. I'm
write
not
it.
writing a chart or a graph or anything, but I'm just thinking all the time.
Mm,
And I'm aware that sometimes in company, I can suddenly sort of slightly vanish mentally because I'm thinking, well, why would he feel that way about her? You
mm,
have to explain, you have to be clear when you write because you are writing about characters in your head who other people don't know. You know, it's a bit like when small children say, well, Katie took my biscuit. Um, Children don't understand that you have to explain the scenario. Who's Katie? Where were you having biscuits? What happened? As a novelist, you have to explain. You don't want someone to say afterwards, that didn't make any sense. You said he had a
mm,
bad temper, but then later he didn't have a bad temper. So you have to make things clear. And I've tried really hard to make things clear.
mm. No,
Um,
certainly the book is clear,
mm,
and you are teaching other people how to write. So
mm,
if you were advising somebody to write about their own heritage and their own identity, what
yes.
advice would you give them?
I think to think a lot
Yeah.
first. I mean, Doris Lessing famously said that her novels were in her head almost word by word. The
Mm,
only reason she wrote them down was because if she didn't, they wouldn't be published and she wouldn't be paid. But as far as she was concerned, they were written. You know, she had them. It's only that no one else could read them. And I feel a bit like that. I haven't got that sort of memory that I can remember things word by word, but I've certainly worked out all the relationships, and there are a lot more characters in here. There are some quite funny characters like Schlossie, who dresses like a man and insults everyone in Yiddish. And there's Israel, who's a psychiatrist who grows giant vegetables. And there are all sorts of funny characters in here who I was working on all the
mm,
time and asking myself questions. You know, why does he not really speak to his wife? What happened? Why does he grow vegetables and focus more on his vegetables than his wife? Did something happen? When did it
mm,
change? And Ida, you know, why is Ida so bitter? You heard her being a little bit snide. She wasn't like that until life was difficult for her. So they have a backstory as well,
mm.
which you probably don't tell the reader everything about. It's
But
a bit
you give enough hints that they understand
Exactly. You
what's
don't want, it's
something
boring
of
to
them.
sort of say, well, what
Yeah.
happened was, you know, she married a man, unfortunately he was ill. That's a bit tedious. So people change in novels as well, which is very difficult to handle. People aren't static and we
Mm.
have contradictions, don't we? So a generally mild-mannered person might actually blow their top.
Mm. And
And you
you
might
also
say,
have characters that are growing up and changing age and
absolutely. There are a lot of
changing.
children in the
Yeah.
novels, so they're developing as well. And
Mm.
perhaps if they spoke 3 years later, they would speak differently. David, for example, the one who has some learning
Mm.
difficulties, feels very much that in this family, there are a lot of gifted people, a lot of successful people. And he says, in my family, you're meant to be special, not have special needs. I'm the wrong kind of special. So he says that now, but maybe in 3 years' time, he won't feel that.
Mm.
Characters are complex, aren't they? As we are.
Yes, and you obviously really develop them in lots of different ways through this book, and develop them convincingly. So I would
Thank you.
recommend people read this. It's not a particularly long novel, but it's very enjoyable.
Thank you.
So what's next for you? What are you working on now?
I'm working on something completely different, because each novel seems to be quite different. So there was the first novel, Rafi's Shapes, was a kind of fantasy shape-shifting
Mm,
novel, and I sort of got that to help my system. And then Water and the Wine is much more about the Bohemian community and the things they get up to. Um, and then this one, obviously, we've been talking about is very much about my Jewish side. And I never talk about what I'm writing because I'm too superstitious that sometimes writers talk things out. There's a famous joke about two writers meeting at a party, and the one says, I'm writing a novel, and the other one says, nor am I. Because if you go around saying, oh, I'm writing a novel about, you know, the French art scene or something, next thing you know, you're not writing that novel because writing is a kind of communication. And I think that if you speak too much about what you're writing, you can forget that actually you've got to write it down. You don't just walk around telling everyone about it. So I don't talk about what I'm writing. I'm too superstitious, but it's very different. And I really enjoy that, keeps me interested.
Well, let me finish with a slightly unusual question, because you mentioned this undercooked chicken on the cover of the book. So if you had to pair this novel with a meal, what what would you serve and why?
Well, I'm afraid Evelyn's undercooked chicken will be there. I do say at the end of the novel that the undercooked chicken is a comic device. Don't try this at home. You know, you could get salmonella or something. So, the reason she's called Evelyn, by the way, is I was very fond of Evelyn Rose, you know, the wonderful cook. So I thought it'd be quite fun to write a character Evelyn who can't cook. So I'm sure Evelyn Rose wouldn't have minded. She was so lovely. Definitely the undercooked chicken. Israel, the one who buys who does the vegetables, he
Mm,
provides the horseradish every year for the Seder plate, and
yeah.
people's mouths just sort of burn with the taste of it. And got to have some crunchy vegetables there so that Ida can say, oh, the vegetables were crunchy. So I should also mention, Jonathan, there's a wonderful audio book. The book can be bought anywhere, or ordered anywhere. But on Amazon, there is a wonderful audio book with an actress called Sharon Ekman. And I think she just does it brilliantly. And she can handle all the Yiddish and the Hebrew and the blessings and everything. And she's
Oh,
really good.
fabulous. Oh, that's great. Well, Tamar, thank you so much for being our guest this evening. It's been a real joy to listen to you and to
Thank you
chat
very
to you
much for
and
having
to
me.
say thank you. I'll send you a book of some of my pictures that will find its way to you shortly, and
Oh,
hopefully
I'd love that. Thank
you'll
you
enjoy
very
leafing
much.
through those. Now, just a few words about what we've got coming up before we leave you. So next week we welcome back Harry Friedman for his third visit to Millim. Harry's speaking about his latest book about Bob Dylan's Jewish roots. And then on the 17th of November, we've got Alison Marshall. She's our guest. She's written about her grandparents and their immigration story told through their letters. Finally, for now, Charles Harris is with us on the 1st of December. You might remember this was postponed from last week. And this is about his novel Play Me, which is shortlisted for the Page Turner Awards 2025. It's described as a heavy metal comedy crime novel, and it tells the story of a hapless Jewish rock star and his adventures in the underworld of violent criminals in the
Gosh,
Caribbean. What a mouthful,
extraordinary.
but quite an amazing book too. I think it's got about 56 chapters. So
Gosh.
the job of being a Millen presenter is an interesting one. I have to read all sorts of things. Anyway, to book for any of these, please visit millim.org.uk, and you can sign up there to our newsletter, and that way you'll be sure not to miss anything. All these online presentations are free, but if you'd like to make a donation, there is a link in the chat now, and you'll also find a link on our website that will help us with the cost of providing this service. So it remains for me to thank our guest, Tamar Hodes, once again. Thank you so much, Tamar,
Thank you, Jonathan.
and looking forward to seeing you all next time. Until then, stay safe. See you soon.
Thank you.